Life Audio.
Welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations, your authority in navigating the world of homeschooling diverse learners. Featuring Peggy Ployhar from SPED Homeschool, Annie Yorty from AnnieYorty.com, Leilani Melendez from Living with Eve, Stephanie Buckwalter from eLARP Learning, and Dawn Jackson from Dawn Jackson Educational Consulting and Tutoring. With over 75 years of combined homeschooling expertise, experiences, and perspectives, this group is eager to share their wealth of wisdom to empower your homeschooling journey. So grab your favorite mug, settle in, and get ready for insightful discussions, valuable insights, and practical tips as these experts and their guests dive into the hottest topics in homeschooling. Whether you're a seasoned homeschooler, just considering this path, or anywhere in between, you don't want to miss a minute of these enlightening conversations that will empower your child to thrive in their homeschool environment. Empowering Homeschool Conversations is starting right now. Join us to give your homeschool the power boost it needs to successfully educate the unique learners in your home.
Today, we're going to talk about conquering math anxiety, strategies for frustration-free learning. And my guest today is Amy Sneath. After Amy earned her bachelor's degree in early childhood education, her eyes were open to all that the homeschooling world offered. Since then, she created Moxie Learning, an alternative education platform that offers live virtual classes for students and resources to support homeschooling parents. Right now, her and her husband, TJ, are spending some time in their home state of California before heading out on their next adventure. They've lived in 8 states and 2 countries. Welcome, Amy, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. I was telling Amy ahead of the show, we haven't talked math in a while, so it's always good to revisit. I know we have lots of old podcasts, but oftentimes you won't dig through the feed. So always good to have a new voice. Search on our YouTube channel if you're looking for even more resources for math, definitely. It's harder to search the podcast, but you can still. So welcome, Amy. And I always start by asking my guest a question about their background related to this topic we're talking about. Because a lot of times I find they're particularly very passionate because they can talk a whole hour on this topic. So they kind of have to be. But oftentimes it relates to something in their own life that has a story with it. So I'd love for you to be able to share that with us.
Totally. So as a kid, I didn't like math. I was the anxious math child. I really struggled, I think, starting in like 3rd grade when we worked on multiplication facts. And that just felt like such an overwhelming task to conquer. I didn't have a ton of great strategies for it. And I watched my friends just kind of fly ahead with ease on it. And I was just like stuck on my 3s facts forever. And so I kind of like decided then like, I just must not be a math person, right? Which is kind of a term I hate today. But I decided I wasn't born with the math gene. It's not for me. And then I struggled, kind of all through junior high and high school in math as well. And I found I was a really eager learner. But I found that most of the people who teach math in schools are math people. They were people that it just made sense to, and they liked math, right? There was always kind of that like disconnect of it's just not landing with me, how they were explaining it, the verbiage they were using. And so today I really like being able to be the math teacher for a lot of kids who I wasn't the math person. I wasn't just naturally gifted in it. So I can kind of meet them where they're at, which is why I love doing what I'm doing.
Awesome. So how did you get into the homeschooling community? What sparked that?
Yeah, so totally on accident. That's what I kind of say. I graduated. I went to school to be a teacher, elementary school teacher. And then when I graduated, my husband is actually a professional hockey player. And so he went, we both graduated college together, and then he got a contract over in Sweden. And so we went and lived over there for a year so that he could play hockey and we would experience, a new country, all these new things. And I was like, okay, great. What am I going to do while I'm over here? So it was kind of just searching for how I could still be involved in helping kids and the impact that I was having. And that was 2019 moving into 2020. So I kind of got into some online teaching stuff that year. And then 2020, everything shuts down. And so many people are trying to figure out homeschool. And I was like, I have knowledge and I can help people. And so that kind of took me into homeschooling, and just people that I knew or people that found me that were trying to figure out what to do at home with their kids. They weren't happy with what the schools were trying to, piece together. And so I kind of totally just stumbled my way into it. And now, I mean, I'm 4 years in, 5-ish years in, and I would never go back to public schools now. I think it's totally where I'm supposed to be, and kind of helping people be able to homeschool.
Yeah. Can you explain to our parents? So maybe that parent is a math person.
Yeah.
And they have a child that's not. What does that anxiety feel like for on the child's side that the parent might not be able to understand?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was so much that I was, I thought I was a smart kid. My parents told me that I was smart and capable and you can do, I mean, I really, really supportive parents, right? And I think so many parents I'm saying all of the things, I'm trying to do all the right things. And for me, I'm still just not getting this. So I must be dumb. And so I don't want to try because I don't want to make a mistake, or I don't want to appear dumb, or like there must be something wrong with me is kind of how I felt about it, because I'm really trying and they're trying to help me. So it was just this kind of this pattern, right? It becomes a chicken and the egg thing of I don't want to try because I don't want to make a mistake, but then I'm not, kind of progressing because I'm not trying and willing to make those mistakes. So much of it is really practicing, having a growth mindset, and being okay to make mistakes. Every now and then, I'll make a mistake in one of my classes and I call it out. Like I totally call attention to it, because we all just kind of goof sometimes, right? On silly things. And so whenever I do, or I start going down the line, I go, wait a second, this doesn't seem right. And I totally call it out in myself to kind of show kids, I still make mistakes on this stuff too sometimes. So it's nothing to kind of, I try to remove that shame barrier a little bit, because for me, that's so much of what it was that shame feeling.
Yeah. You had said that you didn't want to fail. And I think a lot of times as parents, we interpret that as they didn't want to try.
Yeah.
And that's the wrong way to look at it, because a lot of kids do. And especially those that are really good in other areas of schooling, they just think that everything should come that easy. And all of a sudden they hit this roadblock. Oh, I struggle in this area. These twice exceptional learners, especially is where we see a lot of these issues pop up, is they do shut down because they don't want to look like they don't know anything.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
So I love that strategy though of, everybody messes up. So let's just talk through this. This is what it means. This is how we move through past that. And that we don't let it get us all caught up, because
and that can be in or out of math, right? That can be, I messed up the recipe I was making tonight for dinner, and just showing kids that it's not, we don't have it all figured out either,
Yes.
And I think that's so important.
Yeah. So when you use this strategy, how have you seen kids that come in with like math anxiety start to open up? Do you have any story to share with us?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's my favorite thing. I always tell my husband at the beginning of any like school year or term, or anytime I'm kind of getting a new group of kids in, my favorites, I'm not supposed to have favorites, but my favorite kids right at the beginning are the ones who are like, I don't want to be here. My mom signed me up, And I always kind of try to like take a temperature a little bit of, is this your favorite subject? Is this a subject you struggle in a really kind of casual way? And I had one student a couple years ago who on the very first day of school said, I don't want to be here. My mom's forcing me to be here. I don't like math. Like just so adamant. Most of the time math players, he was just out there with it. And I was like, okay, I totally understand. And I said, this is going to be like different than any other math class that you've taken. And this is not going to be the same. We're going to have fun. We're going to play lots of games. We're going to go at your speed, so you're always challenged. but not too challenged.
Right.
And I told him that right on day one. I go, this is going to be, I promise it's going to be different. And I said, so at the end, the only thing I want from you is at the end of this, term, I want you to tell me if I was right or if I totally led you astray. And I go, and you can be totally honest with me, whatever. So the first couple of weeks, he's coming in and he is reluctant and he doesn't want to explain his thinking, or he doesn't want to. And he wasn't lower in math either. He was pretty high. I think his frustration came from his mind was getting to answers that he wasn't showing work for. And so he'd always be told, gotta show your work, gotta show your work. And that was so frustrating for him. It's like, you're slowing me down. I don't like this. This is, this is so painful for me to go out and write each one of my steps.
Right.
And so what I did for him, and I do for a lot of my students, is if you can tell me how you got there, that's the important part, right? That's why we want them to show their work, so that we can see, are they getting it? Where are they making the mistake? If they are making the mistake, and then even if they're getting the right answer, they know what they're doing, so they're able to apply that thing. And so he thought that was just the coolest, best. Like, I can just tell you, and I don't have to write it all down. And about a month into the school year, he let slip one of the classes. He goes, "It's over already?" And I was like, "Oh, so that's a good sign for me." And then he moved on. He went back to a more traditional school for junior high. And so at the end of our year together, he cried in class and said, "I don't want to leave you." And it was really sweet. And I was like, okay, like, we totally impacted his perspective and his, and that for me is just the best. Yeah.
It's amazing that, just that change of attitude can change so much in the trajectory of just a learning process for a student. And we don't often think about that. We just think if we get through the content, but we forget that there's a whole lot more involved than just the content. And sometimes parents will look for more of a curriculum that will help motivate, I don't know, pictures and things like that, in the books or whatever. But we don't often think that the facilitator has that much of an impact, whether they're the parent or an outside resource like you. But there has to be some excitement. There has to be some willingness to bend and move, because some students can't do that right away on their own. We will continue this conversation after a short break.
This is Empowering Homeschool Conversations, provided by SPED Homeschool, a nonprofit that empowers families to home educate diverse learners. To learn more, visit spedhomeschool.com.
So when you deal with, I know I've tutored math before, just for friends' kids. I have a background in physics. And I just remember I would have to sometimes find alternative ways to get to the answer for them, because the first way didn't always work. And how can you talk through that process of how some students aren't always going to get a concept right away, especially in math, because of the way that it's a lot of times theoretical. They can't picture it in their mind. So how does that come into play with the teaching aspect of math?
Totally. So I think that there's kind of a trend in education right now of let's teach kids lots of different ways, which I think is wonderful, and different strategies. And it's not necessarily just the way that we learned it, right? Or like a standard algorithm way, but let's break things apart. Let's draw bar models. There's kind of all these different strategies out there. But I believe once a kid has a strategy that works for them, go with it. Like, that's the win. They don't need to learn how to do it 3 different ways, right?
Right.
To me, it's on us, the facilitators, to understand those 3 different ways, to be able to kind of present those and see, or even you don't present all of them, but the first one doesn't work, and then you kind of go to the next one, and then
exactly.
Go to the next one. And so, for me, there's such an importance of why are we doing this, right? Like, an example I use is when you're teaching dividing fractions, right? And we can teach, okay, you keep the first one the same, flip the division sign to multiplication, right? And then you flip it over. Right. Okay, well, that's just telling them to memorize those steps, right?
Right.
Why are we flipping it over? oh, well, we're actually multiplying by the inverse, right? And so why does that work? And let's do a couple of examples where they don't need to do that on all of their problems, but to show them this is why we're doing that. Now they have something to root those steps back to, like a deeper understanding.
Yes.
That I think is really, really important. So find a way that works for them and then go with it.
Right. Yeah. And you're moving into more of the analytical versus the theoretical. And I think a lot of times, especially when you get up to higher math, they teach more of the theoretical concepts. And I know they test on it too. And I always loved hands-on, loved my kids. You know, we even did geometry by folding paper. Yeah. And so my kids understood the basics. I shared this at a conference I was speaking at. I almost thought it had backfired on me because my son took a college entrance exam and he bombed it, even though he had taken up through calculus. And I was like, what is going on? Then I realized, oh, I never taught him the theoretical side of it.
Sure.
But he's now a biomedical engineer. Once he was able to go, oh, this is why, you know, how this applies to this formula.
Right. And that connection can be made that way. Whereas the reverse, if they don't have those kind of basics, then it's like they're just floating and nothing's anchored. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So yes, I like that you pointed out there's lots of different ways, because I think we pick those curriculums that's like, oh, we're going to teach them everything. And it can be overload at a point too. Yeah.
Where it's like this made sense to me and I was totally tracking. And then we just switch the pitch on them, right? And now also this, are these the same? Are they different? Why does this one, I was fine here, you know? And I think that's where Common Core gets kind of a bad rap, because they are worried about making sure, you know, why things work and how it works together, and really doing like a deep understanding as opposed to just memorize these algorithms, which I think can be a great thing. But then a lot of times we take it too far, right? My mom always says education is like a pendulum. It's one extreme to the other. And just right here would have been
exactly.
Where it's like, introduce them to a couple different ones, because they're all going to kind of grasp different things differently, and they're going to hold on to different things, and that's great. Yeah. But then let them have that success and just go with that. So that's kind of my happy medium there.
Yeah. So how do you know if you've spent enough time on a specific topic, and then when do you need to revisit it? Because that is a question I get from parents all the time. Is like, do we have to have a math program that, you know, builds that in, or how do we go about if our math program doesn't, to revisit concepts so that kids don't forget them? Because a lot of the kids that are in our community maybe have some memory issues, or they just have gaps in their brains, or in their just in general understanding. And so a lot of times, sometimes you'll teach something, and I talk to parents over and over again. I taught this, they had it yesterday, and today they don't have it.
Today it's brand new.
Right.
Yeah. So I think to really not force, but to encourage, I should say, that deep understanding, I have kids, even if they're showing all their steps, tell me how you got there. So a lot of times my kids will actually do fewer practice problems, but we'll go deeper kind of on each one, where I say, okay, that's great, you got your answer. And I'll let them kind of work it out on their own and stumble through it and self-correct and those things. And whether the answer is right or wrong, I'll say, tell me how you got there. And a lot of students, when they first come to me, they think, oh, I got it wrong, because I asked them to explain how you got there. And I go, no, you got it right. Tell me what, tell me why, tell me how. And then I find that lots of times they did get the right answer, but their why just wasn't solid. And it kind of, they happened upon the right answer a crazy amount of times. It shouldn't work out as much as it does, where it was like, oh wait, but we were missing this whole step. And so that worked on this problem, but it's not going to work on the next one, right? So I think that's a factor in making sure that their understanding is really deep the whole time, is having them explain most problems they're doing to you, as opposed to having them do, 15 problems on a worksheet. I'd rather have them do 5 and be explaining them to me and really, really deepening that understanding. And then once they have it and they can tell me they're getting consistent right answers, they can tell me why, I don't need them to do it 15 more times. Especially the younger kids, right? Who their attention spans are shorter. You know what I mean? Like, if they have it, that's great. Let's move on, or let's put math away for today because you crushed it,
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of how I'm assessing all the time, is just having them that constant feedback. And then I can go, oh, but wait, do you remember this part? Or when we have, equivalent fractions, what do we do? And I can kind of be correcting those things as they're coming up. And then as far as kind of circling back, I like to dive really, really deep. So I lean towards more mastery-based curriculums, just my personal preference.
Right.
Because I like the ones that go really deep, spend a lot of time, and then we move on. But a lot of times in math, most of it's building, right? So even if you moved on from this chapter that was on decimals or that was on fractions, you're going to probably use that coming up pretty soon. So before I ask my students to kind of use those things again or pull them out of their toolbox, we kind of do a review of, now let's remember, what do we do with equivalent fractions, or how do we turn, improper fractions into mixed numbers before we jump into the chapter that's on adding mixed numbers, right? Like, let's make sure that we have all those, just a quick, one day maybe, or even just the beginning of a lesson, brush up on those skills where they're going, oh, that's right. Because it is in there, right? Even if they seem like they totally forgot it, it's in there. You just have to kind of pull that out of them a little bit. So that's kind of how I work review in all the time, is just when it's coming up again, because it will, that then we're kind of brushing up on what we did, maybe last chapter, maybe 2 chapters ago.
Exactly.
That way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Because you do continue to use it. And I think a lot of parents do get hung up though on that. Well, what if we get something new and they don't remember it? But
and that's okay.
But you can stop at any point and then review
and just go remember these steps, and it most likely will take 1 day of review, or maybe 2 days of review if it's something they did more at the beginning of the year and now we're pulling it back out, and that's okay too, and that's to be expected. They're kids, and even for us, if we haven't read a book in years and years, right? You kind of remember the gist, but you're kind of
mixed with another story.
So you're kind of like, but as you're reminded of it, it is in there, so we kind of just have to brush up, and that's not going backwards, right? And so that's a little bit of a parent perspective too. You're not losing, you're not falling behind, you're not going backwards. That's just a natural part of math and learning.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I was sitting next to a gal on the plane the other day when I was flying home, and she had a math paper work pulled out. I said, what are you working on? And she was doing college algebra. She's like, oh. I said, well, if you have any questions, I could probably answer them. And so she leaned over at one point and she goes, what do I do with this? And it was like a sign to the negative and then a fraction inside of it. I said, look at your calculator. I said, you just got to put it in.
Exactly. But sometimes even just reminding kids, right? Like, this is how we put these different things into our calculators, right? Where they go, oh,
and they're so complicated now. I was amazed when my daughter started doing college algebra. I was like, wow, it's pretty crazy. So it's good to have some help on that one too.
Yeah,
for sure.
We will continue this conversation after a short break.
This is Empowering Homeschool Conversations, provided by SPED Homeschool, a nonprofit that empowers families to home educate diverse learners. To learn more, visit spedhomeschool.com.
There's lots of concepts that are really difficult to understand in math. What ways can parents help their students? What other types of like scaffolding or helps are there where you can take something that's in a workbook and just expound upon it to make other learning styles, just it easier to comprehend?
Yeah. So kind of 2 answers. One is if you can make it kind of like you were talking about, like even up through geometry where we're cutting out shapes or making angles, right? And then folding things, there are a lot of, and that's just a quick Google search, right? Of your, topic, hands-on, something like that, that can make it really like, oh, I can see it. Anytime kids can see it. And eventually, you talk about really high-end math, college math, that stuff. Eventually you kind of, it's harder to have.
But it's still graphing calculators and even Excel. I was amazed that Excel could do so much of that.
But there are pieces, right, where you can go, okay, I can see it. And so I think for a lot of kids, being able to see what we're really talking about, fractions, if we're cutting things apart, or multiplying fractions versus dividing fractions, and why does one get bigger and one get smaller, and it seems like it should be the reverse, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Things like that, where you really can either draw pictures or grab a Hershey's chocolate bar and be breaking it apart and make it so that they can see it. The other strategy that I like to use a lot is make it relevant to them. Like when we're talking about multiplication and division, where do we use that? Where do we see that? Or fractions or decimals, right? Where do we see that they would be familiar with it, right? I talk about multiplication a ton just because I think it's such a sticking point for so many. And it was for me of, memorizing all those facts and everything. And what I tell parents is that you have to build their foundation to be so strong that by the time they're memorizing, it's anchored into something, right? Where we're having a whole brainstorm party. Before we start solving anything, we're having this whole brainstorm party of where do we see multiplication? And it's buying hot dog packages for the 4th of July, and it's making teams, and it's planting flowers in rows, and make it so that they go, oh, okay, I can see that. That's relevant to me, right? And it's not just something that we're doing in a math book. Or I had my students, we were doing percentages at the end of the year, and I said, I want you to, and everything I do is virtual, right? So I said, I want you to go find something in your house that has a percentage sign on it. We're going to race, go grab something and bring it back. And the things they brought back were hilarious. I mean, it was like a milk carton. They brought back, someone had like a melatonin jar that said, 100% natural or something. And so they brought all these different things back, and it's like, see, this is all around. It's not just on tests, and it's not just in textbooks, right? These are things that are around you. And then they're going, oh, they're recognizing it. They're seeing it around them. And all of a sudden it's relevant, and they can tie it into something where it's not just this made up thing that only appears in math books. I think that's super important too.
Absolutely. Yes. To be able to point it out. I know oftentimes I would take, like in word problems, the characters. My middle son just could not get past sometimes the wording or the examples that were used in them. I'm like, okay, what does he really like? Superheroes. How can we change this to something about superheroes? Yeah. and it's amazing just how the brain just lights up. And
all of a sudden they're totally bought in. We did I had a bunch of football players in a class, and we did a whole Super Bowl kind of themed thing. And we had teams, and it was who are you going for? And we were doing data with it. And it was super fun because they're instantly bought in. They care about it, So if you can make it relevant to something that they care about, they're going to be excited. You're excited because they're excited about it. Everyone's having a good time at that point, for sure.
Yeah, that's a good example. I was teaching at a conference in Iowa last week, and I teach parents how to do a unit study based on their students' favorite topics. And it was the one mom chose football, and she's like, we could do statistics, we could do interviewing skills, we could be your coach, we could do video editing. And she was just like, she had so many ideas, and I was like, yes, you could make an entire high school unit study for an entire semester just on football if you wanted to.
Yeah, and it's when you start thinking about it in that way, right? Like, we're looking for those examples; they're everywhere around us, right? It's
they are absolutely.
Once you see it, they're there.
Yes. And plus that's where your student's going to want to apply almost everything that they're learning is in those subject area or those topic areas that we sometimes dismiss as parents and educators that, that's your extracurricular stuff. But what if they make a career of it? What if they spend more time in that? They have to see the connections.
Yeah.
So, absolutely. That's really cool. So multiplication, you've been talking about it for a while. Why do so many kids struggle with multiplication?
So I have a theory, and that is, multiplication is typically introduced end of second, kind of beginning of third grade. And that's the first time that these kids have had to memorize anything of that magnitude, right? They had to work and become fluent on, addition, subtraction within 20. There's such fewer facts there, right? Than all of these multiplication facts. And it seems like there's even more facts than there are, right? It looks like if you look at, multiplication chart, it looks like there's 144. Well, there's so many that are repeated. There's only 78, right? But it seems like there's all of these facts. So it's this really overwhelming task for them. And they don't a lot of times have great study skills yet, right? They maybe have very limited use of, working with flashcards or really trying that like intentional practice, right? When we're trying to learn something or memorize something or really remember it, right? We're sitting there and our brains kind of know how to, okay, we're paying attention, we're really trying. And I remember I was tutoring a student one time who was kind of struggling on facts and stuff. And I said his name, I said, we're trying to remember this, so that you remember it like even tomorrow.
Right.
And he goes, we are? And like, it was like this total oversight that he's like, I'm supposed to remember these like next week when you come. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, huh. And I was like, because he's going through these things. And it's like this temporary, I'm just trying to remember it while we're playing this game or we're doing this exercise or whatever. And it's like, eventually, like, this is the goal, right? But you want to present it in a way that's not so overwhelming. We're going to do lots of practice. We're going to get there together. We're going to chip away at it. I think having any kind of visual representation of like, look how far you've come. Look at the facts you already know.
Yes.
Because it seems like this really terribly overwhelming task. And I think that a lot of things that we do sometimes as adults, or the ways that we were taught it, that we just think, let's do it that way.
It's just the way you do it. Yeah.
Right. Are reiterating that it's this super overwhelming thing. When I went to school, I got stuck on my 3s because I had done my 0s, which, okay, if we have this,
they're easy.
We're picturing what multiplication is, and we made all these examples. And I say, okay, if we have a plate with 0 groups of 7 muffins on it, how many muffins are there? What? There weren't any muffins.
Right, exactly. It's a whole new language.
But it's an easy one to get the right answers to. And then you go to 1s, and again, like easy pattern to follow, but I wasn't really picturing anything. Well, 2s, that's just doubles, so I knew that from addition. I got to my 3 facts and I knew nothing about multiplication yet. Right? And so I didn't have any strategies. And so I tell parents all the time, teach facts in order that makes sense, where you're building their momentum. Do 10s first, and 2s, and then 5s, and then 11s. Like, go in an order that they can be building momentum. And then when they get to the trickier ones, right, you're going, well, you already know, 3 times 10, 3 times 5, 3 times 2, 3 times 0, 3. You already know half your 3s, right? So you're just having to learn this part of it. And so I think that's super important, that we're taking away their overwhelm, because it's just this big, scary task to them until we show them and kind of scaffold into them, we're going to take this one step at a time. We're going to build momentum. Look how far you've come. We're doing great. We're chipping away at it.
Yeah. Do you encourage skip counting at all for some of those?
Yeah, I like skip counting. I don't think that skip counting is the only strategy that you should, teach, right? So like, if they're skip counting for 10s, that's great. As long as we're tying that skip counting into, we have 10 groups of 5 things, or 5 groups of 10 things, or, that they're, as long as they have that foundation, I think skip counting is a great strategy until they're getting that full fluency. But I like to teach, my 12s facts, and I teach them pretty early on. I teach them as 10 groups of something plus 2 groups of something, because they already know those, right? And that we're putting them together. And so that's a strategy that you can use with a lot of them. With 9s, you can do, 1 group taking away, or with 6s, you have 5s plus 1 more group. And so I think there's lots of strategies out there, and it's kind of like what we were talking about with, the different methods that you're going to teach your child to do math in. Some are going to click and others aren't, right?
Exactly.
So it's kind of on us to introduce different ones and then see what works for them. Skip counting by 7s makes no sense to me. Right? I never learned how to do it, right? If I'm skipping by 7s as an adult, I'm just kind of doing, 7 times 1, 7 times 2, 7 times 3.
Right, exactly.
But if your kid is a child who's going to hear a song or a jingle, and that's going to be, forever in their brain, use it. There's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly.
So it's a strategy that I will introduce, but it's not the only strategy. That I try to introduce others pretty early on. So they can kind of figure out what works for them. And for me, different strategies work on different times tables.
Oh, okay.
And that's
good to know. Yeah. Yeah. And even, as you were talking about it, what came to my mind was, each of those strategies you use, or at least most of them, probably not the rhyming one, but they will translate to a later math function, like skill. And so it isn't bad that you're teaching them these concepts, because they're going to learn, oh, when, I do this, that was similar to skip counting. Back there, or whatever else they were doing.
Yeah. Or even, I'm breaking numbers apart, I'm putting them back together. Those are great mental math skills that can be used for all sorts of different math concepts.
Right. I think a lot of times we think, oh, if I'm teaching my kids how to use, these helps, that it's going to be a detriment. But in a lot of times you're really just advancing their skills and teaching them kind of what they're going to learn down the line anyways, when they start working with bigger numbers.
Yeah. And you're building their number sense too, right? And how numbers can be, flexible, and how we can manipulate them, to do what we're trying to do with them, which I think is super important at all ages, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we had a parent, a couple weeks ago on our new platform say, she thought she had found like the most amazing way to school. And she started talking about games. She's like, we switched to doing everything with games. So why are games so important with teaching math, and how do you use them?
Games are the best. Kids like them, right?
Yes.
They're just immediately drawn to it. Like, okay, we're going to play a game. I mean, it's the same thing you're going to use with, your toddler who doesn't want to clean up their room, and you're going to go, let's make it a game. Let's see who can, clean up the most in the next 2 minutes, or whatever it is, right? Like, we use this as a parenting strategy. Why not use it as a learning strategy? I'm more apt to do something if it seems like a game, or if there's a little bit of competition built in. I like to kind of pull out my kids' competitive sides, and let's make this math class, we'll break into teams, and we'll see which team can, and I try to keep my games to not be so focused on like results. So what I'll do a lot of times to make something into a game is I will have my kids either in a team, because I like to do things in teams where that way they can be talking to each other about the math that they're doing. So if they're solving it together, that's cool to talk about it, especially because I'm on Zoom.
They learn so much more.
Especially because I'm on Zoom, so they can't see each other's papers. So the amount of communication they have to be having, and I force it to at the beginning of the year, because they'll come back and I'll kind of have an idea of who probably wrote it down. And then I'll ask the other one, can you explain to me what you guys did? And they go, and the other one tries to jump in. I go, oh, you guys don't seem ready as a team, go on back. And so they're talking about it a ton. But what we'll do is I'll have them either on their own or in teams. Okay, do this practice problem. And then when you come back to me, you're going to explain, how you did it, what answer you got. And then once you have the correct answer, no matter how many tries that takes you, right? Once you have the correct answer and you know why, you're going to spin for points, roll dice for points. I have a sticky note game. I call it Stinky Feet, where they pick sticky notes and they kind of reveal like different point values on the back. So anything where they're earning points, it's not at all tied to who did it faster. It's not at all tied to, who got the correct answer faster, better, anything like that, right? There's an element of randomness to it. Who's going to win. So one team isn't just blowing the other team out because they're, a little bit more confident in this chapter. Right. And when I have one-on-one stuff, I do the same thing. They play against me. So they'll do the problem. They'll tell me the answer. They'll explain how they got there. Sometimes depending on what it is, I'll do it too. We'll compare our answers, to make sure we both have the right answer. And then when we both have the right answer, we'll spin for points. We'll roll for points. We'll do something where we're earning points. And there's a little bit of competition built in. There's kind of a reward that's coming into play for our brain that are processing it that way. So it's just their buy-in is higher because they're trying to get the right answer so that they can, that
right. And it's not the right answer is not it's the goal, but it's not the reward. Right. And so for kids, especially that have anxiety, that takes a huge weight off.
Yeah. However long it takes and however we're processing it, like your reward is for the work that you put in. Right. Right. How hard, it's so amazing how hard you worked on that problem. Let's spin. And then we'll go on to the next one. Right. Which I think is really cool. Yeah. And there's all kinds of games that you can play, that is specific to the topic that you're doing, right? There's great like area and perimeter games. There's great counting games. There's games that are specific to the topics, but I like to play games all the time because it's fun. It's fun for me too, right? I'm a former athlete. I still have a competitive side, but I don't get to exercise a ton. So, so I like to, kind of build that relationship with my kids too. And they're having fun. We're doing something together, and eating. And it's fun for everyone. And it gets you out of like worksheet marathon, right? Where sometimes in math, it's so easy to just, and they might be doing problems from that worksheet, right? Because those are great practice problems. But there's something on top of it where we're not just doing a worksheet for the sake of doing a worksheet. And they're, kind of encouraged to do well and get the right answers and have that deep understanding, because that's what gets them the points, or that's what gets them the next role, which I think is really important.
Yeah, there's so few kids that find completing a worksheet as a rewarding thing to do.
And it's like, we ask them to do it and we go, okay, great, we can be done now. It's like, was that the message that we wanted to,
No, exactly.
And sometimes when you're in a routine, you might start out super strong in August and September, and then, January rolls around and you're just in this like, worksheet kind of, and you're bored with it and they're bored with it. And that's when that friction I find starts to come up of like, they don't want to do it, or they're like, I don't know. And you're
right, like, exactly. I'm checked out, not here.
Right. We have to bring the enthusiasm to math. And I tell parents all the time, if you hate math, your kids can never know. Just fake it until it's fun for you too, and then they'll have fun and you're having fun. And all of a sudden it's not even about the math, but we're learning together. And that's
exactly. Yes. And I think that's always the best approach for homeschool parents is you are learning in the process too. And if you forget that, you lose out on so much. That
so much the joy
you can be doing. It's a shared activity with your student for sure. So in setting up a lesson plan, what are there any things that you say are musts or not to do?
So I really so I teach 3rd through 8th grade. So I have kind of a wide range of ages and levels and topics and things like that. But most of my classes are structured pretty much following the same format. And so what that is I have them start out with a problem. And that might be an example problem or a think problem in your curriculum, depending on kind of how it's set up. That's introducing the new lesson, right? Which is probably building on what you did yesterday. So I give that to them with no instruction. And so this is another way that I kind of build in that growth mindset. You're not even supposed to know, make your best guess, right? Because then they're problem solving it and they work through it. I don't make them do it for 10 minutes where they're just struggling, but I give them a few minutes to kind of think through it. What do you think you should do? Can you get started? Which is an immediate assessment for me on, can they apply what they learned yesterday to today's, right? What connections are they making? What connections do I need to help them make? Because a lot of times they'll surprise you with the just guesses of the next logical thing to do that they'll know, and they'll put those pieces together, and it's amazing. And that's an opportunity to go, wow, I didn't even tell you that yet. That's so cool. And if the reverse happens and they totally get stuck and they kind of try a couple of things, and I encourage them to try something, even if it doesn't work out, just try it, right? Because that's giving them that opportunity to kind of to fail with very low stakes. They're not supposed to know, right? So there's no fear there. And so I have them try it because that gives me guidance for what I'm going to do for my lesson. That tells me exactly what they know, what they don't know, what connections need to be made, which is important because sometimes we assume they don't know this yet and they do. Or we assume they totally know this and they don't, right? That's not going a little bit backwards and what skills do I need to brush up on? What parts do I need to do? So after that, then I'll teach and I'll say, okay, let's do problems together. Let's work through it. This is how we do this. This is the why we do this, whatever, for a few minutes. And then I have them, tell me what to do on a problem. So I'll say, okay, what should I do next?
I love that.
What should I do next? Where they're kind of, that's my scaffolding of, it's kind of it's an I do, we do, you do method, right? Where I'm doing it first. Now we're kind of doing it together and I'll do this step and what should we do next and what should we do next? And then I turn it over to them, have them show me that they can do, and truly like a problem, maybe two. Then I jump into a game. So the majority of my class, the second half of my classes we're practicing, but we're doing it through some game. They're excited. They're having fun. So it's not just a okay, now do a bunch of those. Because I think
right, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
So that's kind of how I structure my day. And I found a ton of success with it at all kinds of different levels and all different ages.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you say is, for different age levels, it's going to be different, I know. But as far as like doing practice problems on their own after a lesson, or like homework or whatever, what is, do you have a general rule?
I don't love homework for my ages, because I think, if they've done the lesson, and they might be doing some things independently. And I think that independent practice is important, right? Where they're doing it and maybe you're helping another kid, or they're doing a problem. And that's where, the games that come into play, they're really doing it on their own. You could be playing that game with multiple different age kids that are working on totally different topics, but they did one or two problems and they did one or two problems. And then they, ran up and they, spun for points or something, where they're having independent practice, which I do think is important. But my thought on homework beyond that is a little bit of, if they know how to do it and they're just going to do the 10 problems perfectly, they probably didn't need to do the 10 problems because they already had it. And if they don't know how to do the 10 problems, then they're either going to struggle through it painfully and hate math, or they're going to practice it 10 times totally wrong. And so on either end of the spectrum, it's not super helpful.
Right. I love to hear you say that, because I think a lot of parents think there's learning happening. Yeah. And there's not in that time. And so it really is a waste of time, or you're, like you said, you're working against progress. Yeah. And I think parents too sometimes will think like, okay, well, I have the book, so they have to do every problem in the book. My kids don't. When I went to school, we didn't. You know what I mean? Like it's not there. And you think if you're a curriculum company and you're creating, a textbook or something, you want to have enough problems. You don't want to run out. Right. Where a kid still needs repetitions and they don't have any left, which happens sometimes. But but for the most part, they're trying to give too much, right? Yeah, so to force your child to be going back and doing every single problem in the book it's just not totally necessary. And I think it can be a reason kids, start to not like math, which I hate to see. So I'm pretty anti-homework. Independent practice, important. Homework and a bunch of repetitions. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So where can families find you? And then you said you teach specific levels. And then when is your registration opening, or is it open already for registration's open right now. Yes, it's open right now for the school year. So our classes, I kind of take math off of parents' plates. So whether they do one child with us so that they can be focusing on, the other ones, or if they're getting to a level of math where they're going, ooh, I'm not sure about this. Right, exactly. We can kind of do that as a service for them. So if you enroll in one of our, we do math and we also do writing classes. And if you enroll in one of our classes, we take the whole year of math and do it for you. So like I said about homework, we don't assign a lot. I don't assign parents homework, which I think is what that turns into a lot of the times. Right. So we take the full year, we take them all the way through whatever grade level they would be working on, and make sure that those concepts are, deeply ingrained in them. All of our classes are super small. So there's only a max of 8 kids in them. So that way there's lots of sharing time and they can do that explaining of their thinking, but enough where we can break into teams and have really fun games. So our registration's open for that right now. We're also doing summer camps that are 1 day a week right now, that you can sign up for just to keep your child kind of fresh on their skills over the summer. It's very skills-based. Lots of games, because I love games. So we have both those things open right now. So people can connect with me on Instagram or Facebook. Just Moxie Learning, MOXI. And you're on OutSchool, is that correct? I am not on OutSchool anymore. I started on OutSchool. Yeah, but I am. Okay. So where can, so just those social media outlets, or do you have a website? Yeah, the links are in my bios of all those social media things. Okay. And I'll make sure to hyperlink it into the notes. And since this is pre-recorded, those will be in right away when this goes live. So parents can find that and find you and your classes. So that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Amy. This has been an incredible conversation. I really appreciate you talking about this topic, because I know as parents go into the new year, this is one of those high anxiety topics.
Totally.
What do we do with math?
Totally. I could talk about it for
Yep.
ages. So if anyone wants to reach out to me, like I'm happy to have conversations, even just, running things by me or anything like that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
and
thank you for
definitely
having me.
reach out to Amy. I'm glad that you are in this space and helping families in this way, because it's so needed. So thank you for what you do and for helping students as they learn to see that math just really isn't that scary.
Yes,
and it's very rewarding to know. Yes, exactly. Yes, we want more kids that say, I loved math and I know how to apply it. So
that's our mission.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And definitely check out Amy's website and connect with her if you do have questions. I love that our guests want to connect with our community, because there's a lot of questions, and especially with us being live on this show, that you may have that Amy can answer for you. And she's happy to do that. So reach out. Next week, we're going to be, actually, Annie's going to be hosting a discussion on growing great writers. So strategies for homeschooling families. And so we've covered reading, math, and writing all in 3 episodes. So that is amazing. Hopefully we're covering the high sticky subjects for you as we delve into the next school year. So definitely join Annie for that. This is actually my last broadcast now for over a month. All the other co-hosts are filling in. So I'm going to be in Europe speaking at the Global Home Education Conference in July. So excited about that, and come back with maybe some more connections for all of you. So thanks for joining us here on Empowering Homeschool Conversations, and we'll see you next time for the next show. Bye, everybody.
I want to take just a second to thank the team at Life Audio for their partnership with us on this podcast. If you go to lifeaudio.com, you'll find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.
This has been Empowering Homeschool Conversations.
Hello, my name's Rachel Carmen, and I want to invite you to come over and listen to my podcast. It's called Real Refreshment. For years and years as a young mother, I chased after the wind, thinking that the world could offer me the refreshment I longed for. But it was only when I discovered it in the person of Jesus Christ that I really found refreshment. Come on over and join me as we dig into Bible study. I'll see you there.